I know this is going to be a bit of a weird video, but I wanted to talk about a specific study from 2025. But in order to do that, let's first watch a few videos so that it's not just some plain boring thing where I'm reading a study. Thank you for watching, like, share, subscribe, and other stuff like that.
Can human made tools discovered in Tamil Nadu that date back to 3 lakh years, 300,000 years before today, can that challenge the out of Africa migration theory?
So a lot of us don't really think about the out of Africa migration theory the way in a very deep way, partially because of course we look at it like it's just science and it's got nothing to do with us. But of course a lot of us, like some of the people who study Egypt deeply, they we understand the meaning behind this, that it goes deeper than just understanding where human beings came from and where how they came from. So I'm going to read something, and this, by the way, is not from a scientific place, and I'm not even going to say where it comes from, but I'm going to give a slight explanation for why some people are saying what they're saying. So scientists have unveiled an extraordinary new analysis of thousands of stone tools found at a site called Atiremapakam in India, northwest of Chennai in Tamil Nadu, thanks to new dating techniques of a team led by archaeologist Shanti Papu, determined that most of the tools are between 385 to 172 years old. What makes these dates noteworthy is that they upend the idea that tool making was transformed in India after an influx of modern Homo sapiens came from Africa starting about 130,000 years ago. According to these findings, hominids in India were making tools that looked an awful lot like what people were making in Africa almost 250,000 years before they encountered modern humans. This is yet another piece of evidence that the out of Africa process was a lot messier and more complex than previously thought. Papu worked out the Sharma Center for Heritage Education in Chennai with a team of geoscientists and physicists to date the tools. They used a technique called infrared stimulated luminescence, which measures how long minerals were exposed to light or heat. In essence, it allows scientists to determine how long ago a tool was buried and hidden from the sun's heat, and it uses that information as a proxy for tool's age. Writing in Nature, the group explains that the Atter whatever site is ideal for this kind of dating because it was regularly flooded by a nearby stream, meaning that discarded tools were quickly covered up by sediment and water. Those regular floods left behind a relatively tidy stack of debris layers, each of which could be dated. Now, so what we need to talk about, of course, is the out of Africa theory. And I only put these women on here because you can imagine some people who are just like this one day just walking around the beach and then eventually they end up in the other side in Asia. But as we're talking about this, something we have to consider is that there's more than just one way of determining the out of Africa theory. It's not just tools, it's DNA or genetics, paleoanthropology, archaeology, and also it's backed up by paleo environmental research. One of the methods that's been tried, but of course it's a much more difficult one, is linguistics. So, but most people agree that most languages are not older than maybe 15, 16,000 years at best. Like that's how far most of the languages will survive if they survive that long at all.
Does it mean possibly that humans may have originated from India? Okay, so we have stone tools that have been found in, I forget the name of the place. One place in Tamil Nadu, another place in Karnataka. In these,
See, don't get angry at me for not saying the word. Even he can't remember this place. Atirampakam. Atirampakam. Atirampakam.
stone tools date back not 3 lakh years, they date back potentially 1.5 million years before today, 15 lakh years before today, 1.5 to 1 million years before today. That's what is it? I don't, okay, I forget the name, but yeah. So you have stone tools made by archaic humans.
So this part is absolutely correct. So archaic humans, or humans that are preceding the type of humans that we became, or humans that were along us in a certain way, they did leave Africa. As we know, Neanderthals left Africa, Denisovans left Africa, some other groups also left, but we still need to look for more evidence for them. And they left a long, long time ago before the out of Africa theory. And so they have nothing to do with us, meaning human beings who exist right now.
That have been discovered in various parts of India, Tamil Nadu, as well as Karnataka, that date between 1 million to 1.5 million years before today. That's way before the so-called out of Africa migration. The out of Africa migration is said to have happened between 80 to 55,000 years before today.
So I was going to correct this part, but I just wanted to see if he was going to say it first. And I'm going to come back to it. We all know it's about 50,000 years ago. Most people put it around 50,000 years ago. Some put it around 70,000 years ago. But if you read here, it says what makes these dates noteworthy is that they upend the idea that tool making was transformed in India after the influx of modern Homo sapiens that came from Africa starting 130 years ago. So this person makes the date even longer ago than before. This is how you know that it's kind of shaky. Even the 385,000 date is kind of shaky.
Less than 1 lakh years before today. Right? But we have stone tools in India that date back potentially 1.5 million years before today. 1.5 million years before today. So does that completely destroy the out of Africa migration theory? Does it now? And we also have uh, fossil human remains from the Narmada Valley that date back to about 3 lakh years before today.
So I'm going to let him finish, but actually, I just thought of something that is very interesting. So it's hard to say this because it seems like a very long time, but you do realize how short a time 50,000 years ago is. Like, I think some people don't understand sometimes when we talk about the out of Africa migration that we're talking about a very small amount of time. And so when they say human beings are almost, they're almost like not even close to, like, the word race almost makes no sense in human beings. Like, obviously, because we have eyes, we have easy nuance, you can see a human being. Like, you can tell, okay, that guy's Japanese, that guy's Indian, that guy's this, that guy's that, in the same way that you can see it in other things. But the real reason why that is happening is because of our environmental stuff that, you know, gives off these subtleties. But, you know, to another species, they would just see the same thing, kind of. And we are the same thing, obviously, but there's something there that is very strange because we're talking about other animals are like millions of years apart. Like, that's what makes them a different species. They're like millions of years apart. And, you know, most human beings, they're like 50,000 years apart. And that's only if you're taking just the out of Africa theory. Then you've got like mixing that's been happening for thousands of years with the in that period. Another way to think about it this way. Um Egypt, right? You can put it around 4000 BC where you get like real Egypt, right? So that's about 6,000 years ago, right? Egypt is about 6,000 years ago. 6,000 only fits 8 times inside of, 50,000. It only fits 8 times. So if you took the entire history of Egypt, right, and then add 2,000 years after that, our history as well, what you're going to get is 8 times. You only need to times that 8 times till you get to the out of Africa. And it gets even worse if you take it from Göbekli Tepe, which you could put around 10,000 BC, right? That's 12,000 years ago. Now you're looking at 4 times that, only 4 times that date. Like it's the out of Africa theory is really recent if you really think about it. Not the theory, but the migration. The out of Africa migration is really recent.
roughly 300,000 years before today. Now, what is all this? Does it not destroy, debunk the out of Africa migration theory? The thing is this: the remains that we find in the Narmada Valley, those remains are not of Homo sapiens. Those are remains of Homo erectus, most likely, an archaic human species.
By the way, which proves how special we are and how unique we are. It's something that we have to add into the conversation when we talk about not only this subject but other subjects that have to do with like aliens and stuff. The fact that we we didn't start the party, right? The building stuff party. The Homo erectus did it. Others did it as well. Homo naledi. All of these groups were out there building tools before human beings really got into it. But then when we did it better than everybody else.
And the stone tools that we find in Tamil Nadu and Karnataka that date back to 1.5 million years before today, those once again were most likely made by Homo erectus. They are very similar to other stone tools you find in other parts of Eurasia, which are definitely made by Homo erectus. So these are archaic humans who lived in the Indian subcontinent before Homo sapiens emerged in the fossil record.
I hope he's going to mention that the stone tools made by Homo erectus are like garbage compared to the ones that would later be made by humans.
So the oldest evidence of Homo sapiens is about 400,000 years before today in Jebel Irhoud, North Africa. That's the oldest fossil remains that we have of our species. Okay, modern humans, Homo sapiens. So these human made tools discovered are not made by Homo sapiens. They are made by an older, archaic species of humans, obviously our relatives, but not our ancestors. Our relatives, not our ancestors. Homo erectus. And that is fine. That does not have any consequence of the on the out of Africa migration theory, which is a theory with evidence, which has evidence, obviously. That's why it's widely accepted.
It is pretty amazing to think that starting with like the Islamic Golden Age and possibly ancient Egypt and possibly ancient Greece, human beings did figure this out, that we all came from somewhere in Africa. There are people in ancient Greece who said as much. Like they think that all human beings must have come from Africa. That black people were the first people. They say. So let me just throw out one of the names out there. Diodorus Siculus is one of them who says this, that Ethiopians must be the first people on earth. He has his reasoning, and if you like, I could do that, talk about his theories in another video.
And this theory is about the dispersal of Homo sapiens out of Africa. It doesn't say anything about Homo erectus or Homo anything else, Homo neanderthalis, etc. It's only about how Homo sapiens, us, how did we emerge out of Africa and populate the world? That's the out of Africa migration theory, and I've spoken about that many times, so I'll not go into the details. But that's the deal. Okay, so these stone tools, they do not challenge the out of Africa migration theory. They don't mean that humans originated in India, nothing like that.
So I just wanted to put this video out first before we look at the next one and then look at the paper, because it is always interesting to know that around the world, people at all times are always challenging anything that is around, yet people like to make this idea that the mainstream and all of these are all just in one group. Now, some groups are easier to play with, right? Because only a small number of people are studying it. But big ideas like the out of Africa theory, you're not gonna get stuff like that easily challenged or easily unchallenged, just remains the same over and over. No, that stuff is going to get challenged fast, of course, because emotions are high. And like I mentioned a long time ago, the Chinese were the first to say it. They used to put it in their textbooks that Chinese people were the first on Earth, or they were had a completely unique evolution. They put all their geneticists on the job. They put all of their greatest this and that, and they could not prove it. Once they realized that we're of Africa, when I was still trying to see if I could learn Chinese, gave up a long time ago. Um, a lot of the lectures they gave starts with out of Africa because they know. And again, they tried.
Look, if new evidence appears, I will revise my understanding of how the world is. But based on the best evidence that we have today, the out of Africa migration theory is the best theory that we have so far. In the future, if more new evidence emerges, maybe genetic evidence, maybe archaeological evidence, maybe fossil evidence, or whatever, then based on that, I will be happy to revise my understanding of the world. But right now, this is the best theory.
So before we continue, I just want to say I kind of want to make a video about Mali also as well, because I feel like a lot of people think that Mali is one of those guesswork things where like one person, some Arab scholar wrote about it. And something I'm starting to notice is people don't realize how many people wrote about Mali. So I'm starting to get a compilation of that where I'm going to basically be reading several sources that talk about this one location. So back to the video and back to the topic.
Them hitting him with the racist thing in particular, that's good. Graham, that hits him. That hurts him.
He's very sensitive.
He doesn't, and that kind of shit, man. There are people that are Atlantis hunters today. There's a guy, Robert Safir. I hate to say his name even, but I will because he needs to be put on blast a bit. Yeah, that's me on the Joe Rogan Experience, and I'm calling out Robert Safir for saying things that, well, he didn't like what I said about him, right? Like, he went out of his way to try to silence me. He claims that what I said about him was trying to silence him, but he immediately and directly tried to silence me by threatening to sue me if I said anything else, which worked about as well as you can tell. I mean,
so I've already teased this video, and I think it's about time we watch it. Now, be careful here because Robert Sapir or whatever his name is. I've heard people say his name in like 1,000 ways. Robert Sapir, Robert Safir, Robert Sapir. And he's very repetitive. Like he says the same things over and over again. And sometimes he puts a 2-minute video with new information and then an 8-minute part of the video that is repeating everything he said before.
Here we are, right? But the thing is, I do believe that the vast majority of my subscribers and the people watching this right now understand why I said what I did about Robert. But I do see that there is a significant enough subsection of you that I need to talk about this. I don't think most of you are dumb. I don't think most of you are racist. I just think that you need a little you need a little light shed onto the tricks that the man plays.
So it's time. So I want to explain something. So there are some people who don't like this person and they say he's like a pseudo historian and all that other stuff. And obviously I believe everybody should be entitled to their opinion, but this guy doesn't come across as like a bad guy to me in some of the stuff that he said. And he mainly cares about, one type of history. Now, obviously I'm not trying to sell him, but I just want to put that out there that I'm not, this is not some big. I've seen some people who just like trash this guy, but I'm not some big hater. And there's a lot of people who believe in the Atlantis theory. I'm sure some of you guys watching believe in the Atlantis theory. I don't. I think it's ridiculous, but I just want to put that out there.
Here we are. This is not me being some Flint Dibble-ish person. This is not Dan being woke and trying to turn around and do the same thing that I've claimed that Flint did to Graham to Robert. No. That's not this at all. This, just sit your ass down. Let's talk about this. Hi, my name is Dan and welcome to Debunking.
So he said a whole bunch of names, which I'm sure you guys have heard of. Some of them you probably haven't. And he said the name Flint Dibble, who is a historical researcher of some kind. I don't remember what type. I think he studies seeds or something. And he is one of those people who gives at least a very mainstream understanding of history. And he's one of the people that made me look into the seed thing of West Africa. And I mean, I already knew about it because you guys have seen on my channel, I talk about it a lot. I actually stopped talking about it because a lot of people would not pay attention when I talk about it. But yes, Africa had a huge farming thing that it invented completely on its own, which probably led to us creating our own iron and stuff like that. And that is one of the most important things. That's all you need to know about Flint Dibble right now.
Robert Safir has a degree in anthropology and is a published author, with his books focusing on our lost past. Indeed, he borrowed the title for one of his books, Species with Amnesia, from Graham Hancock's works. So you would think I'd be a fan of his work, or at least accepting of it. However, there are several things that cause me to take issue. Now,
So I know a lot of you do understand this thing when I say it, but a lot of people I start to notice is they just repeat stuff that some other guy said or some book, or and they're so lazy that again they steal the titles of other people. One of the things that I actually wanted to do with my channel that is kind of different is I didn't want to repeat the same thing that every other person who is within this section says. So when they say this is black because of this, I didn't want to just take it for what they said, but instead I wanted to make this much bigger point that looking at different angles, you can still arrive at ancient people being black in different areas without being biased, without relying on, historical characters or people who were first creating some of these theories. You can update theories and still arrive at the same point. Now, having said that, I do understand that if anybody has ever played chess before, you can't really win with just a king. You need army, right? And you can lose many pieces. You can have 3 pieces, 2 pieces, and still win. But with one, you're done for. So there is something to be said about trying to be the sole survivor, which is not a good idea.
some of you may understand this if you look at this from a different angle, because what I'm talking about here is a corruption of the data, a distortion of the facts when you present them to the public in order to portray some sort of ulterior motive. That's it.
So let me be clear, because a lot of people do misunderstand this. When I react to someone, whether I like them or not, it's not because I'm going to agree with them 100% or I'm going to disagree with them. And when I don't agree with them, I'm going to say I don't agree with them. And so over here already, I can see that he's putting up Flint Dibble, and I'm more likely to agree with Flint Dibble than him. But in Robert Saper's point, when he brings him up, I'm going to agree with him way more than I'm going to agree with Robert Sapir or whatever his name is.
This honest manner of reporting data is done by many for many different reasons. Now, longtime viewers of the channel will no doubt know that I rail against the biases creeping into science, particularly ideological ones. Flint Dibble would be the best known example of this, as most of you watching have seen at least one of my videos covering his dishonesty.
As I said, I don't look at Flint Dibble as a dishonest person at all, but this is irrelevant. I'm sure most of you guys don't even care about this part, but I'm just putting it out there because that's part of the video. And I don't want to chop it up like some people do and remove parts, because then it becomes a bit like I'm playing favorites and playing games. I just want to say that.
Dishonesty came from 2 places. One was a desire to win at all costs and look good in front of his peers. The other one was he felt like he was waging some sort of a holy war against pseudo-archaeology and pseudoscience.
So, of course, I hate doing this, but I got to defend the mainstream. No, Flint Dibble was not doing any of that stuff. And most of the people who put a lot of challenges after him, the stuff that they believe is so ridiculous that you can't even defend them, even when they're right, because their right is based on a coincidence. So basically these guys believe that there was metallurgy in like the Ice Age, which whatever. No, or it was some ancient technology that is great, which again we talked about earlier, how there's 20,000 years ago. That's half the time that human beings out of Africa and all of that. And in order to believe that, you would have to crush a lot of things that are obviously real.
Real archaeology versus pseudo archaeology has the pseudo guys. Well, Flint thinks they happen to have a problem with racism, so he feels justified making his erroneous arguments and fudging the data a hair and missing a fact or two because he has an agenda and clearly he's passionate about it. He thinks that the ends justify the means.
So, no, that is not true. And I don't know his true agenda and anything like that, but based on the evidence that has been provided, it's pretty obvious that Flint Dibble is in the correct for most of these things. And I would definitely say by watching him that he is raising, as equals in a holy war against pseudo archaeology, which I think is a foolish mission because people are always going to believe alternative stuff as well as real stuff. I think what you have to do is just have a big platform and say the truth.
That makes the data that comes from his mouth suspect. This isn't new to the people that watch this video or to most thinking individuals who are skeptical of other people in general and are scientifically minded. This is not unlike the tobacco companies and their manipulation of science. Back in the 1950s, they spent a lot of money to make sure that the manipulated data showed that, there was no link between tobacco and cancer.
So this is one of those myths that have been pushed out there. And obviously the tobacco companies did put some money into some scientists' hands in order to suppress information. But for the most part, scientists who had studied this were studying it truly, and they had already talked about the badness of tobacco, and they had talked about the badness of what he's going to say next, which is sugar companies, processed sugar especially. And you can see people talking about this as early as wherever you want.
According to them, smoking had nothing to do with cancer, and the idea that nicotine was addictive was also complete pseudoscience. This was battled long after the science was in and the evidence was hidden, obfuscated, lied about. Whatever it took, the companies manipulated the data. And this is not the only example of this in recent times. In the 1960s, sugar companies financed at least one study that shifted the blame for heart disease from sugar to saturated fat. This moved it from being the sugar industry's problem to the meat industry's. And this was all done as quietly as possible, and it took decades for this to come to light.
Again, most people know the bad stuff about sugar. Obviously, if you've got good health, it doesn't matter. But if you don't brush your teeth, it's going to rot them quick. And even if you do, it's still got the potential. Your stomach, it does all kinds of stuff to it. And sugar can raise your blood pressure. All kinds of terrible things can happen. You can become obese because of sugar. And these are things that were known. These are things that are pretty much known during the medieval times when sugar was still being used by ancient people. It's not necessarily the fault of scientists that people don't like to read. That's one of the problems. And of course, most people like to read exciting stuff rather than boring information. And some scientists are not very good at putting things out there in a very exciting way. So there you go.
In both of these cases, because they had a clear motivation, these entities cannot be trusted, and I think any sensible person would see this. No, I didn't expose Big Tobacco or Big Sugar for their pseudoscience, but I did expose good old Flint. And I explained how I was able to do that numerous times. Even though I'm not versed in all these different scientific fields, how was I able to parse the data? Well, I looked for tells. I saw Flint doing things that were very clearly not scientific. For example,
so I want to state something. Those examples that he gave have nothing to do with other fields. I know a lot of people like to do this thing where they go and point out that some experts somewhere lie, which, a lot of experts lie in different fields, but evidence of lying in a different sector of something, not even necessarily science, because a lot of the smoking thing had to do with advertisements and stuff like that. and a lot of other fields. It doesn't mean that people are going to lie in this other field. Now, history does have a mechanism for lying, and one of those is politics. And it's done it over and over again. And again, there's been people who challenged it, put the information out there. Again, it's not their fault that people don't like to read, but there you go again.
Well, when he says things like,
And I'd say we could definitively prove there was no large-scale metallurgy in the Ice Age. If you look at ice cores in the Arctic, right, we can track metallurgy of the Roman period, of medieval periods, based on lead emissions that end up in these ice cores. And there are no emissions from metallurgy in the Ice Age.
it's obvious he's coming at this like a salesman, not a scientist.
So I'm just going to state it right now. I'm with Flint Dibble in this argument. What he just said makes more sense than what the other guy said.
Now, in Flint's case, these are off-the-cuff statements for the most part, but in Robert Seffer's case, these are scripted. However, the tells are still there.
Jesus Christ, that's one of the longest intros to a point I've ever seen. So he's going to play his intro, and I'm going to have to skip that because it's got Out of Africa or I Think the Rain is in Africa, that song. And yeah, I got to skip that.
I came across an article this week quoting Professor Stringer, a British physical anthropologist noted for his work on human evolution and considered one of the world's foremost experts and proponents of the now obsolete and debunked Out of Africa replacement model.
So I have to point out, because I've pointed this out in other videos as well, that this guy has a habit of using other people who are actually scientists to try and prove his point. Meanwhile, those same people would 100% disagree with him. So I just want to point that out. When he points people's names out, don't fall for it and think that that other person is like him.
Which argued that human species left Africa and mutated into the various races we have today, killing or replacing the other hominins.
While I have no problem with scientists challenging the Out of Africa model, as a matter of fact, there are several scientists that are doing just that right now. It's a small group, but they're a vocal minority, and they have data, and they're doing a good job with it, and that's just fine in my opinion. But they are not bringing at it, they're not coming at it with a predisposed opinion like Robert is. Robert has already decided how this is, and he's just waiting for the data that agrees with him and discarding the data that doesn't.
Okay, so I thought he was going to mention this, so I'm just going to mention it because he didn't mention it. So Robert Sapir in the beginning said the now debunked Out of Africa replacement model, which he gives the definition of it being Homo sapiens leaving Africa and then getting rid of all the other types of hominids that existed. And obviously that's a very simple way of looking at things, but outside of that, it's not debunked. He just says statements, and he says them, of course, because he, as this guy pointed out, he blocks out anybody who doesn't agree with him, and so again selecting for stupidity.
When Robert says that Out of Africa is wrong, the majority of anthropologists disagree with him. So he says it's debunked. He's actually massaging the truth at a minimum. It's only been debunked to Robert and the people that he has sold that line to. None of the anthropologists he mentioned would agree with him that it's been debunked or that it is obsolete, which is really the term that is poisoned here.
So I want to make sure that we understand what just happened, which is, I'm glad he brought it back. So it was unnecessary for me to do that. But to talk about what he said before, he said the majority of people. So obviously the majority of people believing something does not necessarily mean that that thing is true or not true, because of course, that's an argument from popularity, and that's not how anything really works in real life. But it is important for him to point it out over here because he is making the claim that it's debunked, but it's not. Debunked would mean that a lot of the scientists have thrown it away as a concept or an idea. but it's only his small group that have done that. Even the other people that he mentioned, the small amount of scientists who think about this, and of course, we saw an example of this earlier. Even a small amount to think about it, they don't say it's been debunked.
But Robert uses these terms in order to make it sound like his position is already well established, when in fact it is not. You see, Robert's position is humans evolved out of Africa, came to Africa, interbred with the proto-humans there, and that's where apes came from. I'm not joking.
A U.S.
I love how a guy who believes that we could possibly have metallurgy or something like that in the Ice Age, in the Younger Dryas theory, or any of these theories, also can see how ridiculous this idea is. But this is not the full idea of Robert Sapir or whatever his name is. But a lot of people, they take a lot of what he says as if it's his belief. He believes this a little. He then also believes that human beings came out of their own little pop bubble. So so there's a lot about what he believes. So I agree with him that this is one of the ridiculous things that he says.
biological anthropologist says he's determined humans did not evolve from apes, but rather apes evolved from humans. All aspects of the out of Africa theory lacks empirical evidence, from how races came to be to the hominin origins coming from tree dwellers. No ancient origin myth or religion attributes our start to monkeys. Many of them, in fact, claim that apes evolved from us, where the common ancestor took to the trees after some sort of global cataclysm, and instead of the other way around.
So one of the tricks that some of these conspiracy theorists use, because he just said it now, the global cataclysm thing, is using religious people to try and justify their theories. And of course, this has been done by scientists forever. I can point this out also in the Islamic Golden Age, when they used to try and shove Noah in every conversation in science. And this is where they try to shove him in, like, oh, global cataclysm, there probably was a global flood. There's all these kinds of stories about a global flood all over the world. But of course, there's a story of a global flood all over the world. If you're human, you probably drink water. If you drink water, you probably live next to a river in the past. You didn't have really taps the way we do today, except if you're one of these very sophisticated places. And if you live next to a river, it's possible that that river can flood. Easy peasy. There are many reasons for this, but in some cases it's the rain, so we'll get back to that.
Now notice the reasoning here, that none of the ancient texts or the old stories or myths remember humans coming from apes. But some of them remember apes coming from humans?
So let's be very clear. Human beings did not come from apes. That's not what the theory says. It says we came from a common ancestor. And you saw in one of the other documents they're talking about that it could have been something that's somewhere in the middle, rather than thinking of it like an ape. Like, apes and humans are as evolved as each other. Like, we're around at the exact same time right now. We're as evolved as each other.
This is like assuming that that there's some culture that could have seen through tens of thousands of years, right? Which we don't have anything like that remotely in the record. Who's going to be able to witness humans evolving like this? It didn't happen overnight, right? It wasn't like one day they woke up and they went from being man to monkey or monkey to man or whatever it is he thinks. It's like the assumption that he's bringing, once again, Robert is just kind of massaging the truth. It's right, the assumption.
I love the phrase massaging the truth, but he's really not massaging the truth. Here, he's just outright lying.
Here is that, well, humans can see through deep time, and they record that in their myths. And that's like, there's a reason that it took until the 1800s and Charles Darwin for human myths to be supplanted by basic science when it came to the origin of species.
So again, we have to be very careful here, because Charles Darwin, of course, did do a lot of the groundwork in evolution to make sure that, we understand the origin of species and stuff like that. But there are people who are definitely before him, and you must remember, people who came before him are going to know less than him. He built up information on other things, and of course, there's another guy who was at the same time as him, and there's disputes about that as well. So we will leave that. Of course, Al Jahiz is probably my favorite because, of course, he's one, I'm just gonna say it, he's black, and then two, he actually documented it. A lot of people we hear, they're just like somebody said that, but we have it in a book. Was he 100% accurate about what he said? Nope. But he was at least going down the right direction.
I believe it's called.
Since Cro-Magnon was essentially a modern European, anatomically and genetically, when exactly did all of that alleged evolution from Africans take place? It did not, and Cro-Magnon did not originate in Africa.
Now, it's one species of hominid that Robert focuses on as being first, and that's Cro-Magnon man. And he makes claims that Cro-Magnon man did not originate in Africa. But those claims, they rely on sleight of hand.
So the word Cro-Magnon has now been removed by most people. It's considered outdated because these Cro-Magnon are not seen as a completely different species. Instead, it's Homo sapiens that were not identified. And now they're called early human Europeans. So they're just Europeans they're Africans who came to Europe in about 50,000 years ago, which is about the time out of Africa seems to take place.
Pointing to an extinct group of archaic humans, which appear to have contributed DNA into the gene pool of modern populations in West Africa. In other words, sub-Saharan Africans could not possibly have populated or turned into Europeans. They did not leave Africa and magically mutate 35,000 years ago, as they carry archaic DNA not found in the genome of Cro-Magnons.
So let's read this from Science Daily. It says, some 40,000 years ago, Cro-Magnon, the first people who had a skeleton that looked anatomically modern, entered Europe, coming from Africa. Genetics now show that a Cro-Magnon or Cro-Magnoid individual who lived in southern Italy 28,000 years ago was a modern European genetically as well as anatomically. They conclude that the Neanderthal people who lived in Europe for nearly 300,000 years are not the ancestors of modern Europeans. So we have here from 2020, although the adult skeleton discovered in 1868 at the Cro-Magnon site have been studied several times, the immature remains known as Cro-Magnon 5 and exhumed at the same time were only analyzed in detail once some 30 years ago. Since then, doubts have persisted concerning the minimum of immature individuals present in the assemblage. A reanalysis of those immature remains, cranial fragments, and long bone diaphyses documents the presence of the 3 neonates and 1 older infant in the sample. They are morphologically and materially similar to recent and late Pleistocene modern human infants, although the metaphysis of 1 femur are modestly unusual. They also document an unusual mortuary age profile at Cro-Magnon, with 4 infants, 3 older adults, and an additional adult, which raises questions about the manner of selection of individuals deposited in Cro-Magnon rock shelter.
West Africa has signs of the interbreeding between Cro-Magnon and an archaic, unknown species, and it is isolated to Western Africa. Robert uses this to imply that humans from the rest of the world, those without the admixture from this unknown species, could not have come from Africa because they lacked that admixture. But the out-of-Africa models, they all claim that humans either came through Northwest Africa or through the Arabian Peninsula. None of the ones that I've ever seen claim that they came through sub-Saharan Africa. In other words, sub-Saharan admixture and any unique characteristics of it do not affect the out-of-Africa model in any way, shape, or form.
So I've got an agreement and a disagreement. The disagreement is the Cro-Magnon part of it. So that he's accepting that as a species and it's not, it's just human beings. The part that I obviously agree with what he's saying is that obviously people in Africa continue to evolve. And so there are going to be stuff that is found in Africa that's not found in Europe. And that is absolutely true. We don't need to invoke or talk about the ghost populations at all because we haven't even started talking about the mixing of other groups because Cro-Magnon, as he tries to put it, is just early human beings. Now, even though Cro-Magnon might have contributed a little bit to who the Europeans are, there's a later people who came in about 36,000 years ago who are the one okay from Asia who are the ones who are mostly responsible for the people that we see today in Europe. And then obviously more and more people kept coming in.
Now, Robert has to be aware of this. This is very simple information even a first year student should have under their belt. It is true that a small group of scientists who believe some of what Robert does, that the early hominids left Africa as Homo erectus and returned as Cro-Magnon, but the notion that this created apes, this is not seen in anybody else's work or the genetic record. At least from what I can tell, he seems to have just conjured this up on his own in order to make his ideological point.
So, as we've discussed before, this guy is not that creative. A lot of these ideas, he's just taking very old, debunked ideas and passing them as as his own. And some of them, he's misinterpreting them, perhaps on purpose, and then throwing them back out there. Um, the part where humans turn into apes is only one of the ridiculous thing. I think the other one is the water one. That's the one that's kind of hilarious to me.
While some modern politically motivated interpretations of the Bible promote the idea that Noah had 3 sons that represented 3 different races, reflecting the demographics that populate the various parts of the world in modern times, this was not the case, as all early civilizations shared the same ruling nobility, which were ethnically distinct from the populations that they governed.
This guy puts way too much effort in his nonsense. So, of course, he tries to debunk something, which is the biblical point of view, which is that there's Shem, Ham, and Japheth, and Shem, Ham, and Japheth gave birth to all the races. This, by the way, is not a biblical point of view necessarily. It's people who, part of the Abrahamic faiths, who believe in taking important characters in the Bible or whatever book you want to choose and blowing them up to be more significant. And that's why they take the fact that they say that Noah was told to go east, west, and south to have, spread and be fruitful. And they take this to mean that the 3 sons must be the people who seeded the rest of the world. Now, of course, this is only if you believe that Noah was real. This is only if you believe that his sons were real. This is only if you believe the flood happened. And this is only if you believe that their sons went in different directions, which is not necessarily documented. So while we're here, let's just debunk something. So you can see here it says, Then God blessed Noah and his sons, saying to them, Be fruitful and increase in number and fill the earth. This is where, by the way, they get the idea that the sons moved in different directions. And basically, this is Japheth. This is to the point that we even have the word anti-Semitic today or Semitic today, which is weird because it's based on a misinterpretation of the Bible. So let's get to the point. What it says, Noah, a man of the soil, proceeded to the plant of a vineyard. When he drank some of the wine, he became drunk and lay uncovered inside a tent. Ham, the father of Canaan, saw his father naked and told his 2 brothers outside. But Shem and Japheth took a garment and laid it across their shoulders. Then they walked in backwards and covered their naked body. Their face were turned the other way so that they would not see their father. So what you can see there is Just a little story about a guy, about the personality of Canaan and of Ham, really. And then you can see there it says, when Noah awoke from his wine and found out what his youngest son had done to him, he said, "Cursed be Canaan, the lowest of slaves. Will he be to his brothers?" He also said, "Praise be to the Lord, the God of Shem. May Canaan be the slaves of Shem. May God extend Japheth's territory. May Japheth live in the tents of Shem. And may Canaan be the slave of Japheth." You will, of course, notice that in this, there is no talk of skin color. There is no talk of any of that. The only thing they get from this is the slave part. And because Africans have been slaves in America and other places, some people then took that to mean that the black races, which is not here, is what he was talking about. Also, what they don't realize is this was just talking about the kids of these people, not necessarily his entire lineage. So it doesn't even make sense. And then thirdly, this is just a curse that Noah put out there. It's not something that is done by God or something. This is just him being angry. Now, to address the lost part, which is absolutely hilarious, which is the part where he says, the by the way, those very scary, weird things with blue eyes, he says that they were the ruling classes around the world. And then, of course, the question is, okay, so what happened to their ruling status? Why is it that people with blue eyes and blonde hair are only found, for the most part, in the northern parts of Europe, and they don't look like they're ruling anything?
Now, this is not a position held by modern politically correct woke people. The idea that the three different races came from three different people and are very distinct that way, and that one's better than the other and the other one's better than them, is just not the kind of thing you're going to see them espousing. This is a very outdated model. As a matter of fact, it was outdated by the 1920s, and Robert's well aware of this. But he also is well aware that he misspoke when he claimed that all ancient civilizations were ruled by one ethnically distinct group of nobles. This is...
I see what it did there. But yeah, that is probably the weirdest thing about what he does, which is he likes to assert that people believe something and then he challenges it. This is called setting up a straw man, which is to throw out an idea out there that people don't believe in and then pretend that you're destroying them. They believe this out of this Shem, Ham, and Japheth theory, and boom. It's like, no.
Scientifically unfounded. The best evidence he has is statues around the world with blue eyes. Statues he cherry-picked from the far more numerous examples that do not have blue eyes. Once again, Robert's over here massaging the data, taking a kernel of truth and turning mountain into molehill out of it. And
so I also like that saying, turning molehill into a mountain, or making a mountain out of a molehill. But he is absolutely right about this, which is that the blue eyes, which are very rare, if at all, exist in certain places around the world. But I think something he missed, a trick that he missed by pointing out that most of them were black eyes, is that the blue, a lot of the time, was just a replacement for the black. That is why the others are far more numerous. And you will see blue eyes in many, many different places. Sometimes it's purposefully done. Sometimes it's, removing of color. Sometimes it's just that they mixed certain colors, or it looks blue to our modern eyes. Not that it isn't blue, but they would have interpreted differently.
Trying to convince the world that his ideological perspective is the only good one. And it leads one to ask the question, why is his data so heavily corrupted? Why is it that the words that he spits out are half-truths? Well, that really has to do with why I call him a racist. So strap yourselves in, because we're about to go down that rabbit hole.
So one thing a lot of people don't like to do, especially in certain circles, is call people racist because they believe it's overused and stuff like that. So when they have to pull it from the depths of their heart that this person is really racist. I can actually give you one example of this.
I do have to ask you about, because in between the time that we booked you to come on the show and you actually coming on the show, you had a guy called Nick Fuentes that you interviewed.
Nick.
Yeah. And then you did an interview with this guy. Like, this is not a guy we would ever have on because he's a racist, Holocaust denying, as far as I'm concerned. But you had him on, and then you took that interview down and apologized.
Now, he believes that different races of men came from Cro-Magnon interbreeding with other hominids.
It's been conclusively proven by DNA sequencing that the various human races came about by different admixture of different hominin species. The dominant contribution that we all share is Cro-Magnon.
Now, this is not accepted by most anthropologists, but Robert claims that's the case, and in addition to that, the Cro-Magnon man, the Europeans as he calls it, which is close to accurate, I have to say, the Cro-Magnon man is the ancestor of modern Europeans, but he claims that Cro-Magnon man went back into Europe, or went back into Africa, and interbred with Homo erectus.
So if you don't understand, Homo erectus is older than most of these, and the reason why he's saying this is because he wants to believe that this is what is responsible for the going backwards of Africa, as he likes to put it, because he's a weirdo. But yeah.
And so then he makes the following claim with no reason whatsoever. It has nothing to do with the rest of his argument. He just throws this in there for no apparent reason.
A news release by the Australian National University notes, citing new archaeological research, that Homo erectus, an extinct species of primitive humans, went extinct in part because they were lazy. The statement goes on to say, an archaeological excavation of ancient human populations in the Arabian Peninsula during the early Stone Age found that Homo erectus used least effort strategies for tool-making and collecting resources. Researchers say this laziness, paired with an inability to adapt to a changing climate, likely played a role in the species going extinct.
So you can see probably why he threw that in there. He has to say salute to his racist fans, and that's basically why he throws that in there. And I'm sure this guy's going to point out how racist that is. And of course, that's a massaged truth, because obviously Homo erectus had lesser tools, which is why it's important to talk about the one in India, because those tools were lesser as well, not because they were lazy, but because that's what they came up with. But two, they did choose simpler solutions. That's smarter. That's how engineering works.
Despite it having nothing to do with his argument outside of this, he injects the idea that Homo erectus was lazy. I'll give you 3 guesses as to why. Now, if you haven't guessed by now, I know it doesn't take long for most of us, here's Dave Chappelle's character Clayton Bigsby to explain it to you. Now, this is the sort of things, the tells, that clue me in that Robert is not a trustworthy source, that he's trying to sell his audience on something, not educate his audience on something. Basically, his position is some races are better than others, and one of them happens to be the white people. They're the best of the better than others. And this is why he uses a Charles Darwin quote at the beginning of a video. You would think a Charles Darwin quote would be generally benign, but think about it in the context of one race is better than all the others.
It's always funny to see this happen all the time when people finally catch on and they're like, oh my God, how can this guy? Now, here's the thing. This guy is actually somewhat popular, Robert Sapir. So there's a lot of people who believe this. And a lot of them, I mean, I have to say it, are sort of religious a little bit, which sucks because, you know, they're mixing something that is pure with something that is impure. And this is why I also defend religion when it comes to the extremes in Islam and stuff like that, because there's something to be said there, which I think I have to make a video about that some other time.
Mankind has diverged into distinct races, or as they may be more fitly called, subspecies. Some of these, such as the African and European, are so distinct that if specimens had been brought to a naturalist without any further information, they would undoubtedly have been considered by him as good and true species. Nevertheless, all the races would probably deserve to rank as man. It must not be supposed that the divergence of each race from the other races, and of all from a common stock, can be traced back to any one pair of progenitors. Charles Darwin, The Descent of Man.
So obviously he's getting the wrong end of the stick. It's pretty obvious that what Charles Darwin is saying over there is, even though human beings look very different to any normal person, it's pretty obvious that when you look at the evidence, all human beings are the same or come from the same, and they cannot be considered a true species, meaning they cannot be considered separate from one another in the same way that, you know, different species are considered different from one another. But he's not understanding that. Now, I'm not saying Charles Darwin wasn't a racist.
Now, there's a lot of races, and some of them probably deserve to be considered as men. I mean, there's a lot of them, and they have different admixtures, and they're all over the place, but some of them probably should be considered as human.
So what a lot of people don't understand about that is clearly Charles Darwin's bias, him being a racist, is fighting against the evidence over there in that statement, which is why he says all human races should probably be considered man. Now, again, these are two biases this is one bias smashing against evidence, and he is reluctantly accepting it.
Even though they don't quite look like the rest of us. I mean, this is why he conflates sub-Saharan Africa with Northern Africa and Ethiopia and the peninsula and all that crap, because he's fundamentally opposed to the idea that humans came out of Africa. And a lot of the data he brings to the table may well be accurate, but he doesn't vet his data. In fact, he cherry picks it to support his position. I mean, look at this tweet. Egyptian mummies that he mentioned had more Turkish DNA in them than they did European. But that won't make his case, so he doesn't mention the Turkish DNA. He omits it. He omits all of this in order to make a case that Europeans were the rulers of the ancient world, and the fact of the matter is the genetic record does not vet that at all.
So I'm not even gonna go too deep into this one, but of course we can talk about that in another video. And no, it doesn't show what he says it shows. Even in whatever, it's still more towards Middle Eastern than European, which would not work for him at all.
The idea that Europeans were the rulers of the ancient world, white people were the rulers of the ancient world, the ruling caste of all societies, is crazy, but that is his position. All right, when I was on Joe Rogan, I mentioned the fact that he liked to juxtapose old hominid models with modern humans. And here's the clip that I was complaining about.
So before he moves on, I want to actually say one more thing that is actually very important, which is, even if it was 100% accurate that Europeans were ruling class at one time or whatever, just like how Europeans in the 1800s pretty much went around the world dominating the world, this is not proof that anyone is better than anybody. Just because you dominated at one point, that doesn't mean you're better than anybody at all.
Yeah, because I never bought into the story that someone could walk out of Africa and then over time, the skin tone changes, the facial features, and the structure of the hair changes. I never really bought into that.
No, if you're not seeing why I had an issue with this, let me massage this a little myself and see if you come out of this with a different opinion.
Yeah, because I never bought into the story that someone could walk out of Africa and then over time, the skin tone changes, the facial features, and the structure of the hair changes. I never really bought into that.
Now, we live in exciting times as far as all this goes. I mean, the genetic evidence could over.
So obviously, we should all get the point that he's making over here, which is, whoever put that video out there puts a weird reconstruction of what a black person looks like, and then puts in damn near perfect looking people. And if we do the opposite, obviously people and it's actually funny because he puts the white people there because some white people are not gonna get it until you do it the opposite way. So, for us, it was like painfully obvious in the beginning.
Overturn Clovis first, or Clovis first. You see where my brain is? It could overturn the out of Africa theory overnight. I don't have a problem with that. I really don't. My problem is the person that is presenting the data is so heavily ideologically invested into it. He lies. He misrepresents things, and then we can't know for sure that any of what he brings to bear is accurate, and we have to go through it all again. In other words, he may as well have not made a goddamn thing if you're the least bit skeptical.
This is absolutely true, and not only is it true, I mean, it's like the other way around. Even if he came up with something that is of any worth at this point, it would probably be doubted offhand, because why wouldn't it? It's like the boy who cried wolf. At some point you go, okay, everything this guy says is probably a lie.
And that, my friends, is a problem. And you can say, oh, no, he brought a lot of good stuff to bear. No, look. There's a difference between a guy like him and Ben Van Kerkwijk. Ben, I don't agree with Ben. When it comes to the vases, he thinks they're ancient high technology. I think that they're not. Okay? However, if Ben brings a vase scan to the table, accurate vase scan. He doesn't remove data from it in order to make his case.
So again, that's a different side character, and that's another person that we could talk about in another video, but they're irrelevant. So let's get to the end of the video. We might have to fast forward this one.
Robert removes data from his shit in order to make his case. And that's a problem, okay? That's a problem because he doesn't care what the real answer is. He cares what his answer is borne out to be true. And that, my friends, I don't care if you are big pharma, if you are big freaking science, if you are big tobacco, if you're big sugar. I don't care if you're Flint Dibble and you're woke, okay? Flint's woke. Big pharma, big sugar, all these guys, they're all, like, it's simple with them. They're just greedy, right? But what would you call Robert? What would you call Robert? Racist. Racist, right? They're clearly white supremacist, racist. And that's why I said what I said on the Joe Rogan Experience.
So I've cleared up this video. Thanks for talking. Obviously, I don't like the fact that he abuses the word woke. I don't like some of the other stuff. The guy doesn't come across as one of the baddest people. A lot of people have their little circles as well, but we'll talk about that another day. I know that we don't want to dive too deep into this evolution thing and focus more on just ancient history, but sometimes we have to look at these things and know that there's this stuff going on. One of the things that happened when the internet came out is that we stopped having a shared, at least, television culture. Like, we all used to watch the same movies. If you name like celebrities, almost everyone would know them. But today things are fracturing, and sometimes we need to bring them back together. So thank you for watching. I hope I achieved what I wanted to do. Goodbye.